Hi there. For this episode, please know that at the beginning we were having a bit of a technical difficulty to get Dixie logged in. So while we were waiting, I kind of rambled on consent in Japan as I had just returned from teaching in Japan and also visiting my family. And there are many observations I've made, and my thoughts are still not fully formed. But the beginning part I'll be discussing around my initial analysis on consent and female identified people in Japan. So if the beginning sounds a bit rambly, it's because I suddenly had a room full of people to talk to, and I'm like, aha, talk about consent in Japan. So the beginning is a little awkward, and I may also seem a little bit distracted because I'm like trying to look at messages over here to see if she's getting in. So please forgive me. I hope you'll find it interesting. And if you want to go directly to Dixie's, just fast forward to that. Okay. And now for the main show. Into Consent Dojo. I am currently talking about the status of consent for female identified and female bodied individuals in Japan. Sex education is almost non-existent, but the Western image of, or outside of Japan, image of sexuality in Japan is based upon the commercial products put out. And the image is often put out there that somehow Japan, everyone's kinky and it's all free for all, which is not the case. Which is as if to think that every American has a horse and owns guns. It's just as ridiculous, right? So teaching a shibari class for women with an emphasis on consent and negotiation was exciting and revolutionary and also heartbreaking. So how is it that there could be such a developed sex ed, not a sex ed, developed sexual product and imagery in a country where women feel that they don't necessarily have agency? It has more to do with the development of the red light district. And when I say red light district, I don't necessarily mean like, say, prostitution, but anything that has to do with entertainment. Now, somebody here says somebody's mom is from Hiroshima and sex was never talked about in our house. Somehow I was made to feel sexuality was bad, or discussion of sexuality. It's a really interesting mixture because it is more about shame as opposed to guilt, as opposed to, and whereas in the West, it's more centered around guilt. So what's the difference? Guilt, think of guilt, and this is very, very simplified, okay? So please forgive me, it's very simplified. Guilt as vertical, shame as horizontal. Meaning shame centers around one's relationship to other and the social obligations and the position one has relative to others, whereas guilt is in relationship to a supernatural, omniscient others rule set. So guilt, vertical, big guy. Shame, horizontal, as in relative to others. Okay. So does that help in terms of figuring that out? When somebody said, when I visited Japan about 10 years ago, I thought interesting that sex is so visible in some ways, but also still taboo to talk about. It's visible commercially. So there are many things that are permissible as commercial entertainment, but speaking of one's own is a whole different thing, right? So confusing commercial visibility with private sex life, whole different things. I also discovered that it was incredibly difficult to find a shibari class volunteer, somebody to assist me in having a very real class, a very real scene in the class, not a demo, but an actual scene, which meant I put out a call for, and put out a call through my various connections about I need a volunteer of somebody who's truly interested in having a mini shibari scene with me. To which most of the response was, I don't know anyone who'd do this privately, and I can find models, but it will cost about, how much was it? $500, anywhere from $300 to $500. So where I usually teach, which is outside of Japan, when I put out a request for this, I don't have a problem with it. But in discussing about this with Mr. Sugiura Norio, or Norio Sugiura, who's an amazing photographer and known for many photo styles, but particularly around rope bondage photography, and beautiful. He's been shooting for the last 50 years. He speculated, and I think there's truth to this, that kink play in private life does not happen often between partners. To which I asked, if it's not happening between partners, who's engaging in the kink play, and how's shibari being engaged in Japan? And he's like, yes, it is very different here in Japan, in which I knew that, but I wanted to see what his take was. And he thought that, first he thought, well, maybe it's because in Japan we don't have that much space. And then he thought, no, it's something else. We don't actually talk about our fantasies, and most people around shibari or kink is a visual fantasy and consuming of visual entertainment or recreation recreation created by, and entertainment created by, professionals. So maybe going to a kink bar, which is very different than, say, going to a kink party in, say, North America or Europe. So visually consuming in spaces that are commercially established, where one is not required to identify as, I am into kink. So this gives an argument against the movement in North America by some mental health professionals to make kink as an orientation. Right. Let's see here. So kink and shibari in Japan. Because in the outside of Japan, the consumption of rope imagery in Japan is centered around commercial production, which in Japan is made for people who want the fantasy but don't necessarily have or want immediate access to it. But that's exported, creating an imagery that everyone in Japan is engaging in that. So skewed visuals. Okay, and Dixie is still trying to get in. So I'm just going to keep talking. All right. So here's another interesting thing that I have noticed over the years is around kink, and this is my discussion with private players as well as professional players, and particularly with women-identified people. There is a lot of accepting of all range of kink activities, which interestingly is a stereotype set of behavior. And I see like the same scene essentially repeated, and discovering and in talking to people that if a private player can enjoy some part of a larger scene, even if they didn't enjoy the rest of it, they'll put up with it. Yes, similar to how some folks assume that everyone in India practices tantric sex. But of course, everybody in India does tantric sex, don't you know? Because, which is actually a commonly held misperception. But if you step away and look at it more humanistically and realistically, it's not realistic at all. Thank you for pointing that out. Absolutely correct. Okay. So the acceptance of getting a smidge of satisfaction and putting up with a putting up with a lot of things that are meh. There's this expression shoganai and gaman shio. Shoganai meaning, what can you do about it? And gaman shio, let's endure it. This sounds like it's part of the Western fetishization of Asian culture in general. Yes, I would absolutely agree with you on that. And there is an article that I've written around the myth around the histories of shibari and Japanese bondage. And you can find that in the Spectrum Boutique. So I'll have the moderator put that in the chat in a moment. Now, other things I've noticed about consent in Japan. Whenever I'm teaching in Japan or speaking with bilinguals and professional translators, when I ask for the word consent around private play or sexual agreement or negotiation to be translated, the word consent, the translators draw a blank. And then the light bulb occurring of, oh, that's a problem. Keep in mind also that while there's a very well-developed entertainment industry and a red light district, districts in Japan that has much to do with like the Edo period entertainment quarters, and it's contained therein, okay? And as I said, sex ed is pretty much non-existent. This country is also one that's plagued with plummeting birth rate, increasing dissatisfaction around general sexual happiness. Japan's one of the lowest of the developed countries or economically advanced countries, and a higher level of suicides, especially among teenage girls. So put this all together, and we have a portrait of something that's very troubling. Not to say that in North America, Canada, US, or Europe, we have blissful consent and great sex. We don't. And the discussion around consent right now is at the bleeding edge. So we're a few steps different, and I say different, not necessarily ahead, because keep in mind too that in European-based cultures, the Enlightenment, yeah, I'm talking about the Enlightenment. I'm talking about 18th century philosophical discourse that eventually led to the various revolutions and toppling of monarchies in Europe. The idea of the independent, the Enlightenment period, what is an individual versus state? What is an individual versus an individual liberty versus a larger organism of state, and what is monarchy? That discourse never happened in Japan. What the hell does that have to do with sexuality? Actually, a lot. To have a sense of self and one's rights. Well, oh my God, it is a Dixie. You may have to turn on. There we go.
Why wouldn't we have problems with muting after those problems?
I've been talking about my recent insights into sexuality and consent in Japan.
Oh, that's right, your trip.
Yeah, my trip. And before we move on to our topic, first of all, I want to welcome you. And audience, I would love it if you gave a hot cheer to Dixie for coming back. And yeah, can you see
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I've been tap dancing by talking about consent in Japan. I thought it related. Okay. Before I close up the discussion around consent and sex in Japan, as well as the mistaken identity of what Westerners think of sex life in Japan, are there any questions or comments about it? I would love to entertain that. And for further discussions, I would invite people to come to my office hours where we can talk more about it. So last call for questions on last call for questions around sex in Japan. Well,
So cool that you got to talk about consent in Japan.
I know, and it was actually quite revolutionary. Um, and I gotta say, I was a little bit nervous doing this bilingually because I was like flipping back and forth between English and Japanese. Woo, God. All right. So since I'm not seeing further questions, and because people are here to hear your take about consent and storytelling. So let's launch in. What would you like to start on? Now, dear viewers, we're not necessarily talking just about sex and story and talking about sexual storytelling. Although Dixie De La Tour is famous for body storytelling, during which time people tell real life stories told live on stage without notes about sex, gender, and relationship. Do I have that right?
Sex, kink, gender, and body image. But yeah, relationships are definitely in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it is a revolutionary event, and not to mention, is a hella fun social event. If you have not been to Body Storytelling Live, I encourage you to do so. And you can also see the videos therein, and which I'll ask the moderator to put that in the chat field. But you're not just about sex and storytelling, are you?
No.
Come on.
No,
Give it
it's about me or about the show? Which would you like me to
about
talk about?
the work you do around
Work I do.
storytelling.
Well, if I talk about what I do, first and foremost, I am a coach, a story coach who works with people to tell their stories. I have a particular passion for the introvert. People make jokes that, my fetish is fear, because I love to take somebody who lives in fear of speaking and getting on stage, or maybe expressing themselves, and empowering them to get on stage, because I believe it's life-changing. If they're willing to do that, if it's something they fantasize about doing that, empowering them to do that, making sure they get a standing ovation when they do it. I want that more than anything. It's my favorite thing to do. And it's the one that I always get most excited about. If there's somebody who's terrified, then I am holding my breath for them. I'm giving them way more coaching than anybody else, because I want it to feel good for them. Because once you do it once, you can speak up for yourself in the rest of your life. You can go to work and ask for a raise, or you can express yourself. Whereas before you were like, nobody really cares what I think about things. Suddenly you start speaking up in your life because you did that scary thing. So you can do it everywhere. And that's what I'm really passionate about. I'm also a sexual folklorist. I love to collect these stories that are not talked about. We are supposed to keep them secret. Everything that's ever been removed because it's tawdry, not supposed to be discussed. I collect these stories. And I'm lucky enough that people come to me and say, I have a story about this. And I'm like, let's put it out there. And those stories are collected orally. And we put them out for people to hear, either on YouTube or on my podcast or on live stream, so that people can discover that weird little thing they thought they invented. There are a lot of other people out there who thought they invented it too. There's a lot
So
of you.
you're known as a sexual folklorist, and body storytelling certainly centers around sex, kink, etc. But a lot of your private coaching, as well as the group classes you're doing, isn't just about sex. Like,
Mhm.
okay, so you've had people come learn from you that ended up telling us or using storytelling skills in other situations. Can you give me a couple of concrete examples that wasn't outside of
Outside
sexuality?
of sex, I've taught people, I put them on stage for TEDx. I put them on stage for women in technology. I've coached a lot of people who've gotten up and they use my formula at keynotes and presentations and things like that. So I teach people for all kinds of stages because we all have a fear of public speaking. I've kind of developed a system that will help everybody feel like they can do this and get out of their head. I mean,
Yeah, go on.
I mean, we all could have this fear of, I mean, right now, after fighting for a half an hour to get into this call, I'm trying to go, what do I have to say right now? We all have this thing that says, oh God, am I worthy? And I spend a lot of time helping people find the words that make them feel powerful. You
Oh my
know?
God, same thing. While you were battling Zoom, I'm like, I need to make cogent sense of the things I am still processing and trying to write an essay about Japan. It came in. So viewers, thank you for being patient with both of us. Now, in your new program, your new group, like multi-session workshop, right? How to be fascinating. This is not necessarily about people talking keynote TEDx women in technology. And now you've got a thing around using storytelling skill for getting better relationships and sex you want or something like that.
Yes, and I want
Yeah.
y'all to know that Midori is a friend and is the best namer in the world. So whenever I need to name something, my imposter syndrome will make me go, oh, I can't say that. Midori's like, no, I worked with you on stories. You're a great story coach. So she makes me feel more powerful. So my workshop is called How to Be Fascinating, Dixie's Secret System for Brilliant Storytelling. Midori named that workshop. And I felt like a complete imposter, but she said, it's true. And people instantly went, oh, I want to take that workshop. And at the end of it, they went, it's totally true, you know? And I was like, really? But I thank God for you, because I would never have named it that.
And you got a new series coming up, which I also may have had a hand
Which
in.
you also named, yes. Yeah. How to Tell a Bawdy Story, Dixie's Secret System for Uncensored Storytelling. So the sex and storytelling workshop that I've been working on for a long time. And there's been, everybody keeps going, that's nice, that's nice. I want the one about sex. So my sex and storytelling workshop is starting in January, finally. Because isn't it funny? You spend all your time in this realm and you're just like, could you be really specific about what you need about sex? Because people are like, I want it all, I want it all. I'm like, could you be specific? Because storytelling is specificity. So
and what I was just talking about Japan, instead of I want it all, it's like, well, whatever you want is fine, is what ends up happening in Japan, right? And everybody talking around everything. Oh my God, I wish I could export you to Japan, which maybe we could someday. The uncensored, right? I want you to know I helped you name that while being completely jet lagged. Like I rolled out of bed to talk to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's when you do your best work, I guess, because you do a great job.
Okay. You're welcome. And
by the way, did you check out my consent earrings?
No, come little closer, my dear, so I can nibble on your ears. Oh my God, yes. Is the other side no?
Nope. I just had the yeses. I wish they were no's on the other side, but
I wish they were no's because we could go, yes.
Yes.
No.
Yeah. They just felt appropriate because I said yes to this. And it's intimidating because consent is such a subjective topic. You know, it's like nobody's an authority on consent. Every single person has a different take on consent. So I was like, I'm certainly not an authority on this.
And that's the whole thing with Consent Dojo, is that I'm not able to teach consent, because that would assume that consent is easy. Consent is not easy. It's necessary and it's challenging. And then I get to invite amazing friends who have specific experiences, not necessarily expertise, but specific experiences and perspective. Does that lower the pressure? You don't need
Yeah,
expertise, you need perspective
yeah.
to share with the world. So, storytelling and consent. WTF? Why does it matter? And how does it matter?
Well, in my particular job, and there are so many shows that are people getting on stage sharing very personal stories. In my instance, very personal sex and kink stories. These are people sitting in the audience who often have no experience with the subject matter. So you have to control the message enough so that they are not blown away, that they're not traumatized, that they're not going to go, that was not what I was expecting at all. We want them to have a good first experience. They've come in because they have natural curiosity. So we want to make sure that what they get is this gentle, loving introduction to something that was scary. It's scary to walk into a show about sex and storytelling. So we want it to be the most compassionate introduction. And that's why Bawdy has become so much more than a sex and storytelling show, where we have games like Bingo. Let's talk to each other. Let's get a feel for the other people in the room. Let's tell each other stories. This isn't very scary, is it? And then you listen to stories which have been coached, and those stories are guided toward, I want everybody in this room. I mean, as somebody who's been in the kink and sex scene for 20 plus years, I would often go to these events where it felt like they wanted everything to be tailored to what I called the level 11 person. You know, it's just like they would go, well, I have a sound in the head of my penis right now. And it's like, good for you. We're not all there. We don't have to operate at that level. And often they would try and act like that was the level to be at. Anybody who wasn't there was, like, I wanted to make sure that everybody who walked in the door was coming in at their own level of comfort, that they felt like they were accepted at their level, and that the stories that they were going to hear were tailored to them, which meant as I coached a story, I'm going to make sure that I would go, so you just talked about an X cross. Let's explain it to somebody who's brand new. And they go, well, everybody knows what an X cross is. I'm like, don't assume that they know. There's going to be people who are brand new to the scene. So it became educational at the same time that I would make sure that they did it in such a way that, you know, Mr. Level 11 was like not feeling talked down to, and the newbie felt like they were there and totally understand what was going on, was never left behind.
That's a really fine line to walk.
It is kind of an exhausting line to walk too, but
Yeah.
it's important because, I mean, often the scene can be really cliquish. And I want every new person who comes in to feel like they're welcomed and to feel like this is an opportunity to learn about something that is, the world is so sex negative. We want you to be able to have access to these things. A room full of people who understand these things. This is your opportunity. If you choose to, you could walk up to someone who just told a story and ask them, what's an X cross? And they'll explain it to you, because anybody who typically chooses to get on stage and tell a story is probably someone who's willing to explain to a newbie.
So there's consent in storytelling, and then there's consent in story listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's, as I'm thinking about this, and as somebody who has had the pleasure of being coached by you for storytelling and being on your stage telling, I have to have an internal dialogue before I even tell the story on stage. Okay, so visualize, we're now talking about storytelling to a large group, because I also, in a bit, I also want to address storytelling on a one-on-one situation, like a date. But
Mm-hmm.
in a bigger situation, before I even hit the stage, I have a lot of consent things to think about. Like, first of all, how do I consent to myself to reveal this particular intimate secret
Right.
or intimate incident?
Yeah.
Right? So there's that. And then if I'm telling a story about, oh my God, like my story about my first time, that story, and then the story about like when I was in Japan, that one, um, it involves other people.
Yeah.
So talking about other people in my story or in anyone's story, do I need to get consent from them? At what point? Could you talk about this? We've sort of gone around this
Yeah.
before.
Well, first off, in talking about, getting consent from yourself, am I willing to talk about this? That often comes up in the first round of coaching. And if you don't have a coach to work with, you probably want to work with a trusted friend, and you just want to start talking. Tell the story to somebody. Have the person just listen. And at the end of it, you're going to have a feeling in your body about that. Something's going to stand out to you. Oh, I don't really think I should bring up that whole issue with the thing that felt really icky to me. Like,
Mhm.
great. A story is what you include and what you choose to leave out. It's your story. There are 9 million things you could put in your story. You don't have to include it's a really terrible story if you go, I walked into a room, I put the key in, I turned it, I walked out. You can't put everything in a story. So it's what you choose to focus on. And those things that you focus on build a storyline that have you take the listener on a journey. You choose what to put in. And if you don't like part of something and if it makes you feel uncomfortable, you control the direction of the story. You're the narrator of the story. And including people in your story,
Mhm.
um, there there is a common practice, which is, I vehemently believe that your story belongs to you. We have had so many people tell us for so many years, particularly as women, that that didn't happen to you, that that's not your story. You're wrong about that. And especially in the last 5 years with Me Too, that's not what happened. And I spend a lot of my time working with people saying, does that feel true to you? And they say, yes, that's what happened to me. And I'm like, then that's true. It's true to you. They would say, what if the other person says something different? And I'm like, then they have a different version of the story. As you so poignantly brought up, the Rashomon effect.
Ah,
Every everyone can have a separate take on the same incident. And there are different narrators who are going to indicate that each person can interpret things a different way
pause
according to
just a
their
sec.
views. Yeah.
For the viewers, Rashomon is a brilliant Japanese movie. I think it was Kurosawa. Yes, I'm
Yes,
sure
it
it was
was.
Kurosawa. Yeah.
Mhm.
Akira Kurosawa's most brilliant movie about a murder that happened in a gate of Kyoto, in Kyoto. Rasho Gate is what it is. And it tells a story from three different perspectives and three completely different perspectives of the same incident. And it's now the Rashomon effect is a term used around the subjectivity of experience. So yeah, for those of you who are interested, look into it further. It's a fantastic movie anyway. All right, so
Yeah.
back to you.
Kira Kurosawa, the 50s. Yeah. Um, and each one of us may interpret actions differently. It's so incredibly nuanced and it's so subjective, which is what I love about personal storytelling. I love that It's not based on science and facts. I love that it's based on emotions and feelings. And if you're dictated by your emotions and your feelings, then you're going to have a completely different take. And it dovetails so well with consent, because consent is in a huge part about us deciding for ourselves what we want and what we don't want.
Mm,
It's emotional.
mm,
And that's why everybody gets to determine for themselves, what they want and what they don't want. We can't have, there's no way we're going to form one universal way for the world to operate, because each one of us has had something different happen to them. And we can't just say, for me, here's how it should be. And for you, Midori, it should be that way for you, because we've had different experiences in our life. And especially um, male identified people are going to have a completely different experience. So, yeah, I love the fact that we get to decide that for ourselves. Our stories are our stories. And when it comes to consent, I've learned so much about consent from working with storytellers, because as I've been doing this for 16 years now, and in those 16 years, it's changed so much. When I first started, people were like, I really want to tell my story, but nobody can hear it. It's got to be in a room, and only those people that are in the room can hear the story. So we couldn't record it. And so they felt like they trusted those strangers in that room, because they felt like they'd been vetted, because they'd showed up at this underground event. And then as time went by, there was so much pressure from others who said, we need these stories out in the world. There's nowhere to hear stories like that.
mhm.
So I would push a little harder, and I'd go, I'm hearing that the people who are not in San Francisco really need to hear these things, because when you hear a story, you get a little clearer on what you do and what you don't want. Body's kind of like a sampler platter. You're going to hear 4 or 5 different stories. And as you listen to it, you're going to go, wow, I think I want that. And you're making a new decision every time. And it might involve the person who just told you this story, but it's going to change your boundaries each time, things that you want and the decisions that you make. And so I started trying to open the show up so that people could listen to the stories. And I started a podcast, and I always check in and make sure it's okay with the person that I put their story on the podcast, give them the option to change their name, all of that stuff. But the general rule of thumb, since we enter into legal territory when it comes to going out into the world, is I have them sign a release. I say what name is going to be used on the release, and
Or
what
the name of the person telling the story.
telling the story. Yes.
Mhm,
And they sign their legal name. And I advise them that unless this person in the story has not specifically requested that their name be used, that you are going to change their names. So the actions are the same, the actions are true, but the names have been changed.
Do
And we're
do the
maintaining confidentiality.
ah, are the descriptions of the individuals ever changed?
Oh, that happens a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of people will say that story happened 3 years ago. I can't really remember. And I'm like, you know, you can conjure up an image in the story. Is it really important to you that they look a certain way? Does that drive the story forward in a way? And they're like, no. And I'm like, make it some character that you've always had the hots for. You can make it look like anybody you want. It's your story. The facts are the truth, but is it really important that they look like Jeff Goldblum? Maybe not.
Unless the fact that they look like Jeff Goldblum was the hot,
Yes, exactly.
because
And it played into a story. Yeah.
somebody just said, "Oh, yum," to that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so often we have these stories that are these great stories in our lives, and we can't remember every detail. So we take a little license with it and we go, well, okay, why don't I make them look like Idris Elba? That seems hot to me. People in the audience make that hungry noise when you throw it out there, and why not?
Mhm.
It's, you know, if somebody's out there in the common, out there in the news, on the television, on in theater, it's kind of like, I'm sorry, you're a thirst trap. We're gonna adopt you and put you into storytelling, and we're gonna write about you. There's gonna be fan fiction. You just took our true story and we kind of inserted you into it so that we could imagine it was you in this thing
Yeah,
that happened.
and in a recent story I told, I referred to I forgot his name, um, Harry Potter, the friend in
Ron Weasley,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
Hmm.
which is just like the easiest way to describe, because in this case, he really did look like him. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and we are actually naming names of characters right now. But I mean, when you select somebody at that level, it's obvious that that is not the person that it happened with. We're making it clear Ron Weasley and Midori did not hook up, y'all. Like so we're not, I've never had anybody come up and go, was it really Ron Weasley? Everybody gets it's just a tool to describe the characters so that you can have a visual, because the goal of a story is for us to be in that story and walk through it and see the characters and be you and live your adventure, you know? But if you're trying to maintain confidentiality, if you're trying to respect somebody who maybe doesn't want their name associated with a story, who doesn't want their new partner to know that they were involved in that crazy threesome that happened on a boat, you know, that's really easy to
I've
do.
got a
Don't describe them that way.
I have a great question from the audience.
Yeah.
And quote, uh, how can this work for those of us who are neurodivergent and struggle with fiction and not getting caught up in the details? Unquote.
Say it one more time.
Okay. How can this work for those of us who are neurodivergent and struggle with fiction and not getting caught up in the details? So I'm assuming this means the individual has a propensity to get caught up in the details, and making things up may not be comfortable.
Well, I hate to tell it to you, but storytelling works best when you are willing to get into details. It sounds like there is a propensity in some ways to get into details, right? Is that what they're saying?
I'm not entirely clear. I'm reading this directly.
Yeah,
They struggle with fiction.
struggle with fiction. Okay. Well, I would say then you stay as close to the truth in your story as you can. And you probably want to stay as close to the truth throughout the building of your story. And then as a final swipe, go back through. It's almost like if you were building a document and you did find replace. Any place that you used their name and it was Bob, find Bob, replace with Frank. Now, everything in the story can be true. It doesn't matter that they look like they look, because most people are not that great at describing characters anyway. They were tall and they had brown hair is not really going to give away that much. It's
All dark and
names that,
handsome.
huh?
All dark
Tall,
and
dark, and
handsome.
handsome. Yeah. So it's really the names that are going to give things away. Nobody ever says, you said the character was tall and dark. And that felt like everybody knows that was me. It's only the name that they feel does that. So just at the last moment, change the name and you can be as accurate as you want. You don't have to really enter into the fiction realm.
Okay.
I typically advise people, if you're going to change the name, stick as close to the real name as possible. If their name is Frank, change their name to
Bill?
something really Bill. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just easier to roll off your tongue and, you know, It's close.
So don't change it to Rumpelstiltskin.
Overachiever. You're an overachiever.
Yeah. But yeah, the point is to make it easy for the telling of.
Yeah.
Now, for the individual who's asking, or for anyone out there, if you are going to tell a public story, as in to a group,
Mhm.
and even if it's a sexual story, or even if you're talking to women in technology about something about your experience, or a TED Talk, this is where a coach comes in handy.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I encourage that. Um,
Yeah.
I've got another question that's I think really interesting here, and it's again about the group storytelling environment, I believe.
Okay.
And quote, I'm curious to hear about content warning or trigger warnings.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think people take content warnings to the extreme. How can we balance trying to give people the opportunity for informed consent without labeling everything with a consent warning?
Well, I feel like just like storytelling, everybody has a preference. It's very subjective. Storytelling is very subjective. My version of a story would be very different than your version of a story, even if we went to the exact same thing and we talked about it later. There are a lot of schools of thoughts on trigger warnings, and I tend to lead toward the one that thinks that before a story even starts, if you launch into, I'm going to give you a trigger warning, that it can be traumatizing for people before the story even starts. So, what I tend to do is I tend to coach the people and talk to them about it. It's almost like being a therapist. I talk to them about the content, get a feel for where they're going with it, and then keep in mind how that's going to affect the audience. Because I'm always, as a coach, trying to consider what what in there is going to affect the audience. Like, I'm the editor. I want to make sure that the audience is not going to be hit with some shocker, because when we've had things happen to us, there might be something that happened to you and you're still hurting, and hurt people. And before you know it, there's just something spilling out of a storyteller, and it's happened before.
Ooh,
And I want to make sure that they don't traumatize a room full of people. So if I feel like somebody has something that is just ready to spill out of them, I take time with them and I ask a lot of questions and I try and make sure that they are not going to traumatize an audience. My way of dealing with trigger warnings is just to try and work with them on the content and figure out what in that story is the piece that is really hurting them, and we try and figure out how to tell it in a way that's not going to pass that hurt on to the audience. You can still tell your truth, but you're going to tell it in a very different way if you've healed a little bit from it. Sometimes there's a common phrase that we say in the storytelling world that says, tell from your scars, not your wounds. If you're in the middle of it, if
ah,
something terrible has happened to you, then you're in it. And when you're in it, you're hurting and you want to hurt people.
mm,
And that's usually when they don't put you on stage, because it's just too easy for you to hurt other people. So sometimes I work with people and just go, I think we're going to push you off a few months because I think you need more time to process these things. And then they come back and you can see they've got a changed outlook, and they've moved on in it. And it's a story that has some perspective, and they've made some progress in it. And now it's a story that has some wisdom. And that's what the audience needs. They need to learn from a story, not be shocked and gutted from a story. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can you repeat that phrase again? The wound and the scar. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. We tell our stories from our wounds, not we should tell our stories from our scars, not our wounds. It's attributed to Nadia Boltz Weber, who is a Lutheran minister.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
and storyteller.
So, in telling a story that may be charged for either the speaker, even if from a scar, or charged potentially to the audience, how do you care for the audience?
How do I or the storyteller?
Storyteller.
Storyteller. Um, well, often if the storyteller is telling a really difficult story, they can't really take care of the audience. They're too busy taking care of themselves. So, as the producer, I'm the one who goes and takes care of the audience. I'll go out in the audience and talk to people, find out what's going on. Um, there have been times when one of the things about storytelling, the sort of storytelling I do, is there is no paper. So I can work with them perfectly. And there's nothing that they could stay exactly word for word on.
Hmm.
They've developed it, but I can't hold them to the letter because there is no letter. There's just this piece that's been developed. It's a certain amount of time, but in order for it to feel natural, for it to feel like it's coming from the heart, it's just like, okay, you know what you're going to say. And there have been times when people have gotten out there, and the next thing I know, something happens. Sometimes it's the shock of getting on stage. Sometimes it was a plot the whole time. They came to rehearsal. They told me the notes were great. They told the other people in rehearsal, oh, this is such great feedback. And then got on stage and sabotaged the show totally on purpose. And that did not feel good.
Because that violated the consent between the storyteller and the event producer, because the consent also exists there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought I knew exactly what I was getting. And I take great care in creating a lineup. Is there anything that is, I need to particularly take the audience? I have to take special care with them. Where am I going to put that? I'm going to put that in a place so it's sandwiched in between stories that feel good, that feel loving and compassionate. You know, people are often going to want to tell stories that might relate to sexual assault, that might relate to really kind of borderline subject matter. And you can tell those stories on my show. I just have to know what the subject matter is so that I can control it, so that we can take care of the audience. I coach the story to make sure the story is, you know, where it should be for the audience to take care of the audience, and, you know, sandwich it in between some other stuff to make sure that audience is not going to be sent out into the night traumatized by somebody who did something that I or the rest of the show wasn't expecting. Um, and I had that happen once, just totally out of the blue. They got on stage and just fell apart, had a rant, dropped the mic, stomped off. And I got off the stage. I tried to look as cool as I could. And I got off the stage and I had a group of people coming up to me going, you know, every word they're going to say. You know, everything they say, you coach every word. And how could you let them do that? And I was like, I had no idea any of that was going to be how they held me accountable for it. And I was as shocked as they were. So it was a contract broken between a storyteller and me. And I was, you know, I was berated for it. And people thought that I was involved somehow, which felt really horrible. But that's the thing about live theater. You don't know what you're going to get.
Ah, and I'm so sorry that happened to you. And sometimes the live theater non-predictability also brings unexpected joy.
Yes.
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
I'm gonna there is a question that's asked follow up to the trigger warning thing.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think this is beyond the scope of our discussion here as well as your expertise.
Mhm.
So I'm just gonna read it, and I'm I'm going to I I think this might be not the scope of your realm.
Okay.
So, on trigger warning, sometimes people in online spaces such as Discord and FetLife, there are people who will dictate what should be labeled with trigger warnings. Sometimes I feel comfortable enough to share something and don't think I'm sharing something that meets a content warning, but maybe someone else feels it does because they hadn't addressed their own trauma. Or maybe this could be generalized in how can you take care of an entire audience when you don't know the individual? So, for example, the last story that I told was about that clown scene.
Mhm.
And we talked about whether there should be a content warning given about clowns. Now, that might actually, well, this isn't an online situation. In other words, you can't, how do you deal with it when you know that there are unknown unknowns out there?
Yeah. Was that the end of the question? Wait.
That is the end. Yeah, that is the end of the question. So
Okay, go back
trying to
to
be
their
general.
part because you went to the clown part. You lost me.
Yeah. In other words, when one is sharing a story that they believe does not require a content warning,
Mhm.
but maybe someone else thinks it should.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it, or is that beyond the scope of this conversation?
Well, I as I said, one of the reasons that I love storytelling is it's subjective. I feel like that it's really difficult to get it right because I don't know what the player listening, the person who is piping up to say that bothered me, I don't know where their triggers are.
Mhm, mhm,
I can guess given the current state of social media or the world or after Me Too or any of those things, I can take a guess. But there are plenty of people who have triggers that are above and beyond, and
mhm,
I can't predict where they are. So, I mean, do we take the level of every story down to something that will not offend anybody? I mean, that's not really what we do. It's personal stories. We can't just make everybody uh, just simple. We can't make everybody give up their edge and not share really edgy material. So, okay, here's a story. I tend to answer questions like this with story, which are not the penultimate. They may not be the best answer. But I had a story in LA once where the woman on stage was telling a story about how she had gone on a date with a kinkster and he just kept like, park in my car garage, it'll be fine. And she went into his house and he dressed her up in her grandmother's cape. He says, why don't you wear this to dinner? And then he took it to this restaurant on top of a mountain in his car. And he was just acting weird. And she was just like, I shouldn't have gotten this guy's car. And um, when she gets there, the Wi-Fi is not very good. She doesn't have great cell phone reception. And he's going off on this car. And it is a brand new something. I don't know. Monte Carlo. I don't know what it is. And he just keeps talking about how amazing this car, just got it. It's incredible. And so when the valet goes to take it at this fancy, fancy restaurant, the valet goes to take it and he goes, yeah, you better be really good to this brand new car because I got, a bunch of baseball bats in the trunk. And He takes her inside and they order drinks, and the waitress doesn't bring drinks right away. And he's like, where are my drinks? And this other waitress walks by and she goes, oh, that girl's been, whatever, she's in the kitchen. I'll make sure she gets her drink. And he goes, yeah. He makes some comment like, God, tell her I got a lot of baseball bats in the trunk of my car, to the waitress. And the woman in the story is just like, this is a really weird date. So she has set up with a friend a call system so that she can call a friend to say, come up on top of this mountain at this fancy restaurant he took me to. I told you where it was, and I need you to come get me. And she gets up to go to the bathroom so she can make the call. And the guy goes, I'll go with you. She goes, no, I don't need you to go to the bathroom with me. He goes, I'll go to the bathroom with you. I know where the bathrooms are. So he stands outside the bathroom and she has to quietly tap on the phone to say, this guy's crazy. I need you to come get me. And she's trying to get the friend and the reception's not coming through. And finally she says, oh, there's an emergency. And he goes, well, we can do it at your house. He goes, no, he's just, you have to take me home. And he's pissed off. He puts a steak in a box. He goes out to the car. He's stomping around. They start driving down the hill, and he is driving like a maniac. And he pulls into an empty parking lot with no lights and stops. And she's like, what's going on? And he goes, I didn't check to see if there were what they did to my baseball bats. I'm going to check the trunk. And when he gets out of the car, he locks the doors because he's got one of those key fobs. And she's sitting in the car. And he's back in the trunk and he's spending his sweet ass time. And she's telling me this story because she's a friend of mine. And I'm just like, oh my God. She goes, I'm freaking out. There's no lights in this parking lot. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, so what did you end up doing? And she goes, I started pulling off threads of my clothes. I started pulling hair out of my head. I started to scuff my feet, get in the mud from the restaurant because it had been raining. I just started pulling things out of my purse in his brand new car. And I'm like, why? And she goes, because I'm leaving DNA all over his brand new car. I'm like, why? She goes, because he's going to kill me. But I'm going to make sure he gets caught. So this is what I can do. I got a couple of emails the next day from people to tell me that I should have let them know that she was in a dangerous situation. At the same time, there were people arguing in the audience going, she's standing on the stage. She didn't die. So what kind of warning would you have needed for that? She told you the story. So everybody has a different take on it. For me, the only thing the story really had was suspense. And I feared that it would ruin the suspense angle on a story that had no sex or kink, which is what our show is. If we gave away that one thing, it did have suspense. But some people felt they were a little traumatized by the fact that they were so fearful of the man in this story. My fear was if I said from the very beginning, this story is traumatic, it kind of flavored the whole story a little differently. So.
Well, scary.
Well,
now I'd like to switch this.
yeah.
And we've been talking about group storytelling from a producer and coach perspective and into telling one story to a group, right?
Yeah.
Storytelling as a one-to-one communication tool in dating.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, it's obvious to you as to why storytelling skill is relevant to dating, but it's not for all of us. Why does it matter?
Well, I mean, I can't think of anything worse than sitting down with somebody when you finally make it to the in person, when everything is ultimately decided, is this going to work or not? And having that, so what do you do for a living conversation? And if you really feel like the only thing you have to say about yourself is, I'm a dental hygienist and I like to read Jodi Picoult books, and I collect, crystal moment figurines, and, if that's who you feel like you are, none of those things might be interesting to the other person. So you probably want to come up with some bits about yourself, some stories about yourself. Um, I think we tend to let other people lead in these situations who are more comfortable. And as I've said, I have I have considerations for the introverts. I want to make sure the introverts are not, just bowled over by the people who want to talk about their workday or who want to act like what they do is more important. I want them to be able to, you know, carry their own weight and stand up for themselves. And as someone who, even though I love stories more than anything else in the world, I get bowled over by stories every day. People assume you're the one who loves stories and they don't check in with me. And I'd like to make sure that the people who probably get talked over stand up for themselves.
Okay, this is a good point. And I want to try role playing on this, right?
Okay.
Because all right, folks. So storytelling is a effective dating tool. It's also a really great way to communicate your interests, it's a great way to get the sex that you want, all right? Not just the check mark, but like her class title, it makes you fascinating, and it might also be a way to um, vet is not the right word, but it's like to be able to communicate more clearly that that interests may or may not match. I mean, it's so storytelling as a dating tool, storytelling as a consensual turn on seduction skill. Seriously. But okay, about this thing about being bowled over or non-consent around story.
Mhm.
Okay, so would you be up for you and I on a coffee date?
Yeah, but why don't we start first with one that's a little bit easier to understand, and then we'll go to a
Okay,
more nuanced date. Okay.
great.
Let's just say I'm just somebody you know socially. I'm not somebody you know really well.
I
Hey,
met you at
Midori.
point. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Midori. You're a writer, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been writing this book, and I'm gonna send it to you. I just really want your feedback on it. I'm just gonna send it to you. So just give me your address. Will you just give me your address? How's
Yeah.
that feel?
I experience this frequently, whether around writing or yeah, I do. Uh,
Yeah.
I feel put upon. I feel not having had a chance to even express that I don't have bandwidth, or that maybe I am interested, but now they come off as just pushy and not paying attention.
Do you ever ask what they mean by it? Like, do you ever say, in terms of what are you looking for?
I do. I'll ask around. All right, all right, all right. I know if you were asking me that, I'd be like, whoa, hold on. The first thing out of my mouth would be, whoa, hold on. I'm really busy. So what are you looking for? And how long is this piece of work? Is it a paragraph or is it a novel?
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great example.
So if we could only apply those kind of requests for context to the requests that we get, in dating or communication.
And the
Let's,
assumption is that because I do X, whether it's writing a book or I do dental health care or have sex,
yeah,
that the other person supposing that I am available for all of these.
yeah, yeah,
I wonder how many dentists, I bet a lot, at like a holiday party, somebody goes up and says, oh, you're a dentist, right? Yeah.
So it probably happens for you in business meetings too, where people sit down with you and they just start taking over the conversation. They just start going, okay, our butts have hit the chairs. And then they just start blathering you in big, important business words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do
Yeah.
you do in reaction to that?
Well, I think when I was younger, I might have just like, okay, they know better. I follow along. And in realms that I don't know better, like say copyright laws. I know just a bit, but I know enough that I don't know anything.
Yeah.
I might be like, oh, okay, I guess I'm supposed to do that. Okay, I could do that. I could see myself doing that. I've done that.
For maybe something like copyright law, but I don't see you sitting there with some, I'm the most important human being who ever lived. I'm just going to talk. Let's say it's a rigger who comes in and is going to talk to you about their tour of Japan and
And
how they've blown everyone away with their massive skills.
and okay, so that has happened also around history of Japanese history stuff, to which, or the truth about shibari bondage, which y'all, there's an article on that. I would be saying, uh-huh, did you have a good time? That's great. I have a thing I gotta do.
Yeah,
Bye.
right. Yeah,
Because now they've painted themselves out as somebody that I don't want to interact with.
yeah, right. And I'm constantly amazed at how people don't check in. I mean, I think that the introverts of the world are much more likely to check in and say, "Can I tell you a story?" But it's people like the one you just talked about who never say, "Can I tell you about a thing that just happened?" Or they just talk without waiting for permission. And in
Mhm.
the same way, the class I've been working on, I'm trying to explain people like in storytelling to get the sex you want. I really want people to understand you've got this story. It's great. Don't think your story is so good that you should send it out like the copy and paste version to anybody you've been in contact with.
Yeah.
Maybe it's oral, maybe it's written. They don't know anything about you. You have to wait for consent before you send it to somebody because you just made a terrible impression with somebody who you don't know where their head's at. You don't know what they've been dealing with. You don't know what level they play at. And all of a sudden, you just took them into flight
Mhm.
and they may not be able to come back. You just took over their thoughts in a way that they're like, I may never recover from that again. So it's really important to establish rapport with people and make sure that you've checked in, you have a feel for each other, you're not a stranger, and then just go, I've been working on short stories, or I just recorded one. I've been going to these little story parties where we record our personal stories. And I saw maybe in your profile that you're interested in this. Could I send you a story? Do I have your permission?
Oh, oh, do I have a little story? And it's a FetLife
Of
DM
course
story.
it is.
Many people might be able to relate to this. This is very recent. The names will be changed to protect the dumbass. Okay, this just seriously happened. You know, so and so, male, domly dom, and says, I'm visiting your area. How do you feel about married men? I'm professional, well-educated, well-traveled, age, this kind of looks, you know, tall, dark, and handsome. Okay. And then says a couple more descriptions. No salutations. Okay. This is out of the cold. And it says interested, ... question mark. Just interested.
I'm really happy they put a question mark because they usually don't put a question mark. Yeah.
And yeah, 3 question marks. How generous.
Ooh.
And to which I said, dear person.
Domly dom.
Thank you for reaching out. What is your question? Your query is incomplete. Quote, interested, ... question mark, unquote. In what? Please state your query clearly. As for how I feel about married men, well, many male identified people are married. What is there to feel about this? Warmly, Midori. To which he responded, dear Midori, interested, ... Are you interested in getting to know each other socially and exploring things further? Signed, name. Me, dear person. If we run into one another at the various kink and social events, such as Dark Odyssey or West Coast Bound, or Bawdy Storytelling, or various local events, including art galleries openings, please do say hi, and we can enjoy a sociable conversation. As for stating here whether I am interested in making more meaningful acquaintanceship or friendship with you, I have no idea, as to you are a stranger to me. I am curious, as we are not previously acquainted, and it seems we've not met before, why have you decided to reach out to me? So
oh my god.
Yeah, and so yeah, and why have you chosen to reach out to me? As you have not mentioned why, I am baffled. Were you referred to me by somebody? Was there something of my profile? Or was your original query a standard DM you send out to those fitting a certain demographic that's desirable to you? Or simply put, why did you choose to contact me in particular? Him. Why I messaged you. I was scrolling through profiles and happened upon your profile. We're close in age. You're intelligent and sensual, and also married. I was intrigued. I am not looking for professionals or of either type, but I perceive, perhaps incorrectly, that you might also be open to the idea of a friend, hopefully with benefit. Was my perception off? Oh, and you're attractive.
Oh, that's so sweet. You
Yeah.
get much better ones than I do, because right before I logged on or tried to log on for a half an hour, it said I had a message on Facebook on Bawdy Storytelling, and I went in and there was a message from somebody and it said Dex. And I'm like, Dex? And then it came back in and went, sex. I'm like, okay. That's when it's really funny to have the auto, your message has been sent, you will get a reply as soon as they are available. It's like, that must be frustrating for you to just send out misspelled demands for sex. Dex. I beg your pardon?
Yeah, yes. God. So somebody wrote that you are so much nicer than I would have been. Oh no, that's not being nice. That's me being full sarcastic.
Yeah.
I'm being fully sarcastic and
entertaining yourselves.
I'm entertaining myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, because counter trolling. Yeah. Because interested, ...
And they get so upset when somebody does it back to them. God, what's wrong with these people?
So storytelling, you know, we're giving bad examples, but can we go back to the coffee shop, you and I?
We are giving bad examples.
Oh, so bad. Yeah. So we're at the coffee shop on a awkward first date.
Yeah.
how are you going to open your wanting to tell a story? Let's go for a good example. We've been talking about bad.
Okay, I want you to advocate for yourself.
Mhm.
Okay. Oh God, I have had such a day today. It's been an intense whirlwind. Can't believe I'm finally here. Can I tell you a story?
Uh, okay, but can we like just have a nice cup of tea for a moment? I've also had an intense day and I think I need to calm down a little bit. And then I'll
Oh,
be happy to hear yours.
yes. Very good. Often so people are so caught up in their own stories, they forget that other people aren't there just to bounce off stuff off.
So, did I do good? Did I do good?
That
Did I?
was really good. That was really good. I think
Okay.
that would probably make someone go, other human being forgot to take into consideration the other human being. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So just saying, can I tell you a story and then launching into it? You got to wait for the response. And if you're the one being asked, you do actually get to say yes, no, or not at this moment.
Mhm.
Uh,
And as you develop your skills, soon the people who don't even ask, can I tell you a story? You'll be able to go, I like people to check in before they like take me into their day because I've had a day too. So I like it if you ask first because there's no reason you have to be bombarded with somebody else's. I find that it's much worse since the pandemic because we've all been locked up in our house. We become the center of the universe and we forget that the small moments that we have with other human beings are not just our small moments with other human beings, it's their time too. So it's just kind of like reminding people this is my time too. Please let me take care of myself. And then we can both have what we want in the same way that, like Betty Martin's 3-minute exercise would be, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? We have this much time. Now we have agreed upon what we can do with this time.
for those of you who are not familiar with Betty Martin, I do have an episode of Consent Dojo from last year. Oh my God, with Betty Martin. Please check it out and please check out bettymartin.com and the Wheel of Consent. Now, this is something I do with all my wonderful guests. And as we're winding this up, and thanks folks for your patience. I know we're going a little over time because tech. I would love it if you had some sort of a assignment or homework for our viewers.
I think that it could be just being aware of when you need to advocate for yourself if you can. It's sometimes a little intimidating, but start noticing when people want to just step into your space and start talking at you because your time is worthy. Your time is important and you deserve to have your time treated with respect. So, I mean, we all deal with it different ways. Maybe it's you walk away, they get the message. Maybe it's turning around and saying, please ask me first before you launch into a story. Or maybe it's realizing that if people like that can just have this explosion come out of their mouth, that there are great stories out there and some of them are yours. And maybe you need to get a little bit more brazen yourself. But having lived through that, most of the time when we've had someone do it to us, we're super conscious of it. So I know that when it happens to you, you're going to be the one who goes, can I ask you, can I tell you a story? You'll wait for consent and then you'll start sharing your life with people. Your stories are really important. Other humans want to hear them, but we need to take those other humans into consideration and make sure that we respect their time.
I've actually got a question related to exactly the homework you're giving,
Yeah.
which is, Any thought or advice on asking to talk about the day with cohabitating partners or establishing boundaries therein? Working from home situation have enabled all day dumping, and we're in a habit I'd like to move away from.
So
Boy,
it's an all day dumping.
yeah, well, in other words, they live together, and it's all the stuff all the time. That's how I'm interpreting it.
Mhm.
How to uh ask to talk about the day, and how to establish the boundary when your partner that you live with is coming at you going, oh my God, Dixie, okay, this thing just happened to me, and
Yeah. Is there any way that you, if these people live in the same house and they eat meals together, is there any way that they can make some sort of structure up around the meal? Like maybe put some little, I'm just seeing some sort of little pylon that would be in the desk, sitting there, and it's just like, okay, when this one, kind of like the whole, I have the talking stick kind of thing, so that it feels a little bit more even. It wouldn't go on that long, but it would make sure that the amount of time, I'm one of those people who's hyper conscious about the amount of time that people take up. So
mhm.
like when I'm talking, I'm just like, you should have stopped talking 12 seconds ago. And I feel the same way with other people. And when somebody keeps talking, I'm like, how do not they not feel that? I felt they should have stopped 2 minutes ago. So give them some sort of tool so that things feel like you're evenly distributing things. If they need more, if it's traumatic, if something big going on, then you can go, obviously you need something more. And it doesn't have to be as basic as a talking stick, but to try and keep it to one time of day and kind of segregate it into this much time. I get time, you get time.
And I suppose if one has a propensity for explaining too much, by opening it up, and this happens with friends because I've got a lot of things to talk about from Japan, oh my God. I can say, look, if I'm going over and too much, or you gotta, and if you can't get a word in edgewise, just tell me, because I just might not be aware.
Yeah.
So in respect to other people's time, I would like to bring this to a close.
Okay.
Where can people find you, and where do you want people to find you?
Where do I want to be found? On a boat in the Caribbean.
Oh, yes.
In very, very blue waters in Greece. Just find me there. No, I'm very pale. I would burn in like seconds. You can find me at BawdyStorytelling. That's spelled BAWDY. On pretty much everything. I'm patreon.com, BawdyStorytelling. I am on Twitter on Bawdy, and BawdyStorytelling just about everywhere. So you can find our stories on YouTube under that. You can find special content on Patreon. And I am working on 2 new workshops. I have a workshop starting January 8th, which is called Storytelling to Get the Sex You Want, where I teach you how to craft and record your own stories so that you can use them to send out to people with their consent, and use that as a way to connect with new people, because hearing your voice and hearing your stories is a great way for people to get a feel for you. And it also leads to them telling the stories back to you, because I have had, oh God, at least 50, well over 50 storytellers who have used their stories from the podcast to find dates, triads, the loves of their lives, you name it. It connects people. Storytelling connects people in so many ways. Sometimes it's sex, sometimes it's love, sometimes it's deep connection and lifelong friendship. And then I am teaching my sex and storytelling workshop. This is finally happening after a couple of years of people asking for it. Midori named it. It's called How to Be Bawdy, Dixie's Secret System for Uncensored Storytelling. It starts on Tuesday, January 24th. It is going to be like extra this time. Going to be extra coaching hours. There's going to be office hours. It's going to be a workbook, lots of extra time, private coaching, and final performance. And I'm really excited about it because everybody wants to learn about how to talk about sex. It's the thing we don't know how to talk about and feel good about and make the listener feel good about.
To find out more about your workshops, do they just need to go to BawdyStorytelling.com?
I'm putting them up this week. If you want it any sooner than that, you can go to BawdyStorytelling@gmail.com, the email address that Zoom did not want me to use. Go to BawdyStorytelling@gmail.com, BAWDY, and I can send you information on those classes, and they will be up on the website in the next couple of days.
Great.
And I'd love to have you in the workshops.
Hey, thanks for coming on and talking about storytelling and consent in Consent Dojo.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. See
Thanks,
y'all
everybody.
next month. Oh, next month I got Kitty Stryker. And then after that, I've also got an adult performer about consent.
Have you asked Dossie Easton yet?
Oh, I got to ask Dossie. Great idea. On
Navigating consent, she has a really interesting perspective.
Excellent. All right, everyone. See you around and go practice that consent muscle.
Yeah.